Did you know there was a meeting recently between all the world leaders and the Pope attended at one major event? Do you want to find out why this was important?
Let's find out.
Welcome, brothers and sisters. This is a segment that Mackenzie and I wanted to bring to you. It's a little more casual. It's not an official podcast. We're actually calling this a TM Byte. And the reason we're doing this is because there are things happening in real time that we want to keep you guys up to date on. We want to keep you informed on what's happening, and we want to try to connect dots as they're happening. The podcast is set up a little more in a way to help you and others kind of walk through more of a historical perspective in some cases, or in other cases, we have experts like Barbara O'Neill coming up soon. So
a lot more detailed, a lot more specific things that we're talking about, kind of dissecting a lot more.
Right. Yeah. And this TM Byte is supposed to just be us talking to you guys and giving you some up-to-date information and providing as much perspective as we can. So with that, Mackenzie, we're going to be talking about some stuff that's happened recently in relation to the climate movement, as well as global taxation and unity happening amongst the nations since Joe Biden, our second Catholic president in history, has come in to the presidency. So the first thing we're going to look at today that affects all of us and will come to affect all of us in the future is this climate summit that was held recently, all digitally, but it was on April 22nd, and there were 40 international leaders there, all organized by President Joe Biden, and it had a special message given by Pope Francis. And we have some articles that we'll give you guys links to, but we're going to kind of walk you through why this was important and why this is kind of a historical step in the unity movement.
Yeah, this was a very interesting event because it brought a lot of different things that we've been talking about and that Amazing Discovery's been talking about for a long time, kind of all together in one place.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's happening under the U.S. president that is a Roman Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So you had Donald Trump, which was globally seen as extremely divisive. Whether you liked him or not, he was divisive. And that happened around the world. Now you see Joe Biden step in, and things are starting to change. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes to kind of give you the framework of what this climate summit was about,
yep,
and what the Pope's feelings was on it, as well as who was in attendance. Okay, so this first one's from Catholic News Agency, and it's titled Care for Nature. This is the Pope being quoted here where he says, "I greet you who are gathered in this initiative." So this is a programmed initiative that they're looking to act on with this climate change. And it says right after that, which seems to me a happy one. So you can tell he's endorsing what they're doing at this climate summit. He's happy that it's happening. So in this, he's asking world leaders, he's actually urging them to, as he says, quote, act with courage, operate with justice, and always tell the truth to people with regard to the environment. It's an interesting concept, tell the truth with regard to everything, not just the environment. But then let's see who was at this meeting. Because just, again, to set the framework, we've got Biden gets all the civil leaders of the world who we're about to go through. They all come together, and the first guy to give them a message, a nice welcome message saying, all right, guys, good job all coming here, is Pope Francis.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's see who he greeted when his Catholic president got this group of people together. The speakers, so these are people who not just attended, they spoke. The speakers included UN Secretary Antonio Guterres, Roman Catholic. French President Emmanuel Macron, Roman Catholic. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, not just a Roman Catholic, but a well-known friend of the Jesuits. German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Russian President Vladimir Putin. Turkish President Erdogan. Prime Minister of England, Boris Johnson, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. So, in conjunction with Pope Francis and Joe Biden, who put on the event, what do you think about this list of speakers here? Not attendees, speakers.
Well, it's interesting because a large portion of them are Roman Catholic. And, you know, we have all these countries that are apparently not friends coming together.
I see Russia, China, and America all at the same table here.
All sitting there talking about apparently climate change is what the big agenda is.
This is what got them together, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like they're taking this step towards an event. So they're coming here, meeting together, talking about climate change and its impact on the future. They found this a noble enough cause to come and speak at the same event together, despite very public differences. But they are working toward a specific event, and that is the COP26 UN climate meeting taking place in Glasgow in November.
Yep.
Now, this is important to keep in mind because Glasgow represents to this group of people a finish line of sorts, not necessarily a starting point. Now, it could be a starting point to something bigger, but we'll kind of quote what they said about this Glasgow event. And this comes from AP News. This is John Kerry speaking, who has been essentially the climate envoy specialist going around the world representing the U.S. interests in this climate negotiation. And he says Glasgow is the world's last best hope. He said, if it were 100 miles to Glasgow, metaphorically, we would have done, as he's saying in completing this first summit, the first 12 miles on the lowlands. And we have 88 hard miles to go with a lot of difficult terrain. Seeing this as a very specific journey that has a road to walk and that we have started to walk that road. But this other climate scientist who attended, who's through the Breakthrough Institute, said, I'd say we need to get to the 50 mile, the halfway point, by the time Glasgow starts in November. And this seems to be the push that they're moving here. When we hear the climate change conversation and we hear the narrative around these things, and we see a massive push towards civil leaders moving towards enforcement of climate legislation, we need to go back a little bit, I think, and understand where this climate conversation originated from. And you pointed out something interesting to me about the Club of Rome and a book, 2052. Now, not necessarily that book, the origination of this climate conversation, but maybe that group being part of that initial climate conversation, which is now shaping so much of what's happening here at this point.
Well, it's very interesting because Pope Francis, is one of the first people to speak and address this summit, this group of people that was there. And that's not by accident. That's by design. And as we've been talking on this podcast, you'll have been seeing the connection that the papacy has in all of the different societies and pushing all of these global agendas. Now, like you said, there's this very interesting book called 2052. We've referenced it before. And it's from a very well-known Club of Rome member. But this is not the first piece of work that they've done. They did another thesis, Limits to Growth, which is the first part of that. And it's Club of Rome. It is what it says. It's a group of scientists put together by Rome to basically discuss the social aspect of the world. You may have heard of the Bilderbergs, which is like the financial guru guys who are, in their meetings talking about the finances in the world. The Club of Rome is the social aspect, how we interact, how life is going to be, all these kind of things. So they have some very interesting quotes in this book, and maybe we can read a couple of them as we go, because they will start to really tie in. Because this book was put out in 2012, and it's forecasting to the year 2052. That's basically what this is. It's a summary of limits to growth and how it's going to actually affect people, and how it is very important to have redistribution of wealth, all of these different things to help fight climate change, which is what this big meeting was about that the Pope was speaking at with all these other delegates.
And when you look at what's come out of that, you see Mike Bloomberg, which is a common name for a lot of people. He's actually the special envoy for climate ambitions and solutions. And he was put in that position by Antonio Guterres. So you see Guterres is a Roman Catholic and Mike Bloomberg is a Roman Catholic. Bloomberg has been put in this special envoy position, and he had a quote that said, it's essentially, I'm paraphrasing, there's no question that they're going to move forward with this agenda, but that it can't be a thought-based thing. It can't be an intellectual idea anymore, that it needs to be focused on actually driving results. So the narrative that has been intellectual for so long, I think we can start getting ready for things to start changing in our day-to-day lives, in real-world circumstances, no longer in these think tanks like the Breakthrough Institute or the Brookings Institute or the Club of Rome or the Bilderberg Group, which ultimately a lot of these act as think tanks to play out these scenarios and bring about these policy changes that are then recommended and enacted by civil leaders. Now, I want to focus on what one of the goals of this agenda is in the climate conversation with these people.
How's it going to affect us, right?
Yeah. And what are they proposing as some of these solutions? We see that there's an article that came out that says the title headline is G7 begins, the world needs climate Sundays and, quote, wild Christians more than ever. The Sunday conversation is coming up again, and we're going to go backwards a little bit here in a second, but let's look at what they're saying they'd like to do to help the leaders of the world tackle these climate problems. So it says the climate crisis and biodiversity loss are on the G7 agenda this weekend, so this happened last week, along with the COVID crisis. So it's the COVID crisis and the environment. Now, a Roche UK's mission is to equip Christians and churches to protect and restore the environment by practical action. So now they're saying, all right, we as citizens are going to take the initiative and start a movement, right, that will create practical action by us to help these G7 leaders tackle our climate crisis. What is going to be their mark of practical action? Well, you see that the campaign is focused on a National Climate Sunday event in Glasgow. And where will the National Climate Sunday event be held in Glasgow? At a Roman Catholic cathedral, where they will perform a climate mass. So we are now seeing a crossover between a spiritual agenda and a civil agenda, and that is merging at Sunday. And we see here the papacy's taking it one step further. They're merging it at Sunday Mass. Now, in order for us to protect the climate, we would like you to partake in the Sunday Mass. And this will be part of the initiative. So we can see that crossover. Now, for some people, they would say, man, you guys who don't understand these things, you guys are really stretching here. But we need to talk a little bit about Bible prophecy. Now, we can't cover Bible prophecy here, but we want to direct you to some places where you guys can see some of this stuff for yourself. And we want to talk about, quickly, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Mackenzie, why don't you give us a quick peek on where people can find more information and maybe give us a quick rundown on what we are supposed to see, if Bible prophecy interpretation is correct, then what we should be seeing from these powers and how they act.
Well, this isn't something that we should be surprised about at all. We should not be surprised to see that the papacy is pushing for Sunday observance because of some climate change laws they've been talking about, setting this up forever. This is the healing of the wound, you could say. So we have in the Bible, there's many different prophecies. In Daniel and Revelation are the main prophetic books in the Bible. One very interesting prophecy in the Bible was a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had. Now, he's seen this big statue, and it was all different metals. It was a person, and the head was of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and the feet were iron and clay. And we'll just briefly go over this, but you can study this in more detail and learn more about this in a video called The Mists of Time. So The Mists of Time, let me give you the full title.
And tell them where they can find that.
So if you go to Amazing Discoveries YouTube, you can also go on our adtv.watch. We have our own play service, so that doesn't matter what happens, people can find those videos directly from us. And it's called Ancient Prophecy Correctly Predicts the Future. Daniel 2 Unlocks the Mists of Time. Go check that out. It's got some really good information in there. But this statue, the legs of iron represented Rome, the political side of Rome. In the Bible, you have different materials that mean different things. A metal represents a political entity. Clay represents a spiritual entity. So the feet were mixed with iron and mixed with miry clay. The key is the miry clay, because we are also clay that God molds. But this is miry clay, so it is contaminated clay. So you have this church-state mix, but it's with a false mixture. It's not a pure clay. It's a miry clay. And we're starting to see that very clearly here, where they're taking something that is a lot more political, all these government leaders, and then something religious, which is a worship day, and mixing those two together into this union. So we're seeing that.
And using the civil power to do it, right? Like
Absolutely.
That's the iron part.
Yeah, the enforcement of it being... And we're going to see this happen more and more and more, where the state is going to enforce more religious type laws, which is directly against what we all stand for, which is freedom of religion, freedom of belief, all these things.
Freedom of choice, individual freedom of choice, individual freedom of speech. Not to say that those rights can infringe on other people's rights, but that when we set this standard at a corporate or societal level, well, then the function of the whole Republic of the United States and the function of the basis of what has been the most prosperous era in human history will have been removed, which is the focus on the individual rather than that of the community. And that is what is changing here, right? And what we want to point people to, as we quickly ran through that prophecy, to some people, they may have just said, whoa, what are you guys talking about? Go watch the video that Mackenzie recommended. It's very important that you understand why people have such conviction regarding Bible prophecy. It is giving us the roadmap by which we can prepare for the future. And prepare not to change it, but prepare ourselves for it and to help others prepare. That's ultimately what we're doing here.
We're just trying to help to inform everybody so they can make their own decision, not to go with what everybody's saying or to be forced to make a decision that they don't want to have to make. But just, you need to be educated on the different options, and then we leave that up to you. That's your decision.
And all this is carrying our over into like things that are coming in the pipeline here. So we don't want people to be caught off guard, and we want people who've never heard this information before. If you're upset by it, well, use it as a motivation to go look into this more and find out if we're wrong. If you're inspired by it, take the time to go look at why these connections can be made with the G7 and the UN and even the World Health Organization, all linking back with the papacy and to the Jesuit order, as we've talked about in some of our previous episodes. We want to keep this short and tight, so just to keep these as bite-sized pieces for you guys. So we also want to point to one more thing, which is the G7 meeting where they talked about the global tax rate and the climate again, as well as an additional piece, which is the economic relief to poor nations. And we see when we line up the agendas of these meetings, these are the talking points of the papacy. These have been the talking points of the papacy. We'll link the articles, but we have the Pope coming out and writing a letter to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank saying we need to increase the amount of debt relief to poor nations. Well, what was on the agenda at the G7 meeting? Increasing the amount that they supply, these G7 nations supply to the Special Drawing Rights Fund. And that is the International Monetary Fund for low-income countries. So the Pope writes a letter saying we need to expand the fund. The G7 finance ministers, less than a month later, have proposed and agreed to expand on this fund, as well as agreeing to a corporate tax, baseline tax, which I know the world is probably applauding right now, but I don't think the full weight of what that means has hit home quite yet. And when it does, it will show that I think some of what you and I talked about, that the impact will hit home when the valuation and the profits of these companies that had no longer been paying taxes are now paying a massive amount of tax. And it could even be just a slippery slope to the point where the valuations of these companies are heavily hit. Why don't you tell people why that would impact people at home if these multi-billion-dollar global companies would be hit on their valuations? Why should we care?
You know, this is a very interesting thing, and actually way more serious than people even think it is. You know, if we look at this, so it says that they're going to put a minimum corporate tax of at least 15%. That is a lot. That's very high. Now, everybody, there's almost, it's like a fad, like a movement of people, you know, against corporation, against, you know, there's these terms that get thrown around. I'm just going to reference generally like big ag, you know, against big ag, big box stores, big, you know, big corporate, whatever it may be. And as much as we want to hate on them, there is a benefit that we are reaping from that. Cost of goods is lower. Even if we don't want to admit it, some of those places do supply jobs for people in other countries who, if these companies weren't there, they wouldn't have a job at all. And
there's no doubt that when you add up all the Fortune 500 companies, they represent, or the NASDAQ, what I make of the NASDAQ, they represent a massive employer across the world, and generally high-paying, high-quality jobs.
Yeah, it's easy to hate.
You're alluding to is that they will be impacted by this in a way that maybe we're not realizing quite yet.
Yeah, and you know, it's easy to talk bad about these big companies, but the one thing that you have here, and if you don't have upper level income people, big companies, you actually lose the middle class, which people don't think that they're connected, but they are, because the high class, the big companies are what give jobs to the middle class. If you don't have big logging companies who are making wood, you know, their log prices have been going through the lumber prices have been going through the roof lately. It's easy to point fingers, but these companies have to, you know, keep a lot of jobs in place, thousands and thousands of people in place. Other companies where they are giving work to a lot of people. Now, one of the points going back to this book, to this Club of Rome, is this isn't new ideas. Everybody thinks that this redistribution of wealth, this taxing the rich, we got to get rid of the rich because then the poor will come up. I want to read a couple quick little things. We're probably going a little bit long, but it's very interesting, some of the things that they're pointing out in this book. The gradual closing of the income gap between rich and poor countries will further add to the cost of maintaining current lifestyle in the West. So they're actually saying it's going to cost more to live if you narrow that gap. And they're saying they want to narrow that gap, which is very interesting. Also, productivity growth in the rich capitalistic world will lag. So it's going to go down because of continuing social frictions and strife due to growing levels of inequity. And as a total result, Western styles of consumption will wane, providing more room for emerging world to catch up. So they're trying to suppress the first world countries in order
the growth of first world countries, so that way other poor countries can catch up. Yeah,
exactly.
that's the mindset of that, right?
So then we have another spot here where the author in his thesis says the stagnation and subsequent decline of the global economy is a huge advantage. So they think this is a great thing. This beneficial peak and decline in the total pie will have another consequence. It will uncover a totally different pattern of distribution among the regions of the world. Average consumption per person will be even higher, which is interesting. And then it says, the details of my forecast show that this result, some of the rich getting poorer and the poor getting richer. But then he clarifies. Closer to the end of the book, I'll skip some of these. There's a question close to the end of the book on page 239. Will I be poorer? Some of us will, others will not. In order to give a clear answer, the question must be asked more precisely. The question must be, will I be poor compared to X? Or you must decide whether X should be A today, B, whether you would have been if humanity rose to the occasion and ran a rational world, or C, relative to your peers. So he says that some people, yes, will be poorer. But is that a bad thing? Because you need to determine whether what you're making now is even appropriate in context. And they will be the ones deciding that, obviously. You don't get a vote on that.
Yeah. And it's all kind of leading back to the reason we do all this, is to point people back to the prophetic aspects of the Bible as it relates to how we can prepare for the future. And that's what we're trying to do now. Under the prophetic interpretations that are all throughout Amazing Discoveries material, as well as all throughout the Adventist Church, you'll find that the prophetic understandings in Daniel and Revelation would lead you to look at the papacy in the United States as the main drivers for these changes towards a common good global system. Most people worried about China, Russia, and some of the other countries. But what we see is that the key players are the papacy in the United States. And when we understand that, we'll start to see all these world events fit into the context. And that's exactly what we've seen with the G7 meeting. That's exactly what we saw with the climate summit. And it's exactly what I think we're going to continue to see through Glasgow in November, as well as on into 2022 and into the future. They're going to use, and have been very clear, that they're going to use this decade as a decade of transformation, and I think we're starting to see what the focus of that transformation is. But I believe that's all the time we have. If we went a little long, we apologize. It's just because we want to get you guys as much content as possible so you're up to speed on what's happening. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to hit subscribe and your notifications. If you want to get more like this, we're going to try to be putting out more of these as these relevant events happen so you guys can be caught up on everything. We pray that God blesses each and every one of you to spread the word according to the light you've been given. Thanks, Mackenzie.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you for everybody else for watching. We'll see you next time.